They mocked her in the courtyard like it was part of the daily routine, laughing at the worn-out bike she rode, at the thrifted black jacket she wore like armor, and at the way she kept to herself, eyes forward, words rare. The jokes came in, waves tossed between polished uniforms and perfect hair, each one louder than the last, trying to pull a reaction out of her. But Zuri Bennett didn't flinch. She didn't shrink or explain. Her silence wasn't a retreat. It was presence, a calm, steady weight that made their noise feel suddenly hollow. What they couldn't see, and never thought to ask, was that behind the soft cotton of her hoodie and the second-hand jeans was a last name that sat at the top of tech boardrooms and philanthropy summits. Because Zuri wasn't just another new girl, they were laughing at the sole heir to a billion-dollar empire. And when the truth surfaced, it wasn't her wealth that stunned them. It was the realization that she never needed to flaunt it. She walked through their cruelty with a dignity money couldn't buy. If you've ever been sized up by your appearance, underestimated because of what they thought you lacked, or made to feel like a guest in your own life, Zuri's story is your mirror. Stay with us. Because she didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. Zuri Bennett, 17, moved through the world like a poem whispered instead of spoken. Her presence was soft, deliberate, deeply rooted in self-awareness. She walked the halls of Northridge Academy with the quiet rhythm of someone who had nothing to prove, yet carried volumes within her silence. Her clothes, thrifted denim layered, over vintage tees and a weather-worn black jacket, weren't chosen out of necessity, but intention. Beneath them was skin born into generational wealth, a legacy carved from code and courage. Her natural hair was always pulled into a high puff, strong, unapologetic, regal. Earbuds nestled in place, but the volume was low. She wasn't trying to escape the world, just control how much of it she let in. Her silence wasn't awkward, it was boundary. She had only recently transferred to Northridge Academy, a school where blazers fit like armor, hallways shimmered with entitlement, and lineage mattered more than kindness. Northridge was polished floors and cold glances, a place that defined worth by last names, ironically unaware that the newest girl walking among them belonged to a last name that could buy the school 3 times over. Zuri's mother, Naomi Bennett, was a tech visionary, a reclusive mogul whose AI empire touched nearly every sector. She had taught Zuri the discipline of presence over performance, of legacy over noise. Zuri didn't arrive with security or flash. She rode a bike every morning, wheels humming over asphalt while Teslas and Range Rovers idled beside her. It wasn't about rejection of status. It was about staying grounded in a world that constantly tried to pull her out of herself. Then there was Chloe Whitmore, sharp-smiled, sharp-tongued, and born into all the right circles. She was Northridge royalty, a product of private country clubs, curated Instagram posts, and a long line of assumed power. Chloe didn't see Zuri as a threat. She saw her as a crack in the social mirror, something unpolished, unfamiliar, uninvited. And with Chloe stood Jenna Clark, her friend, her echo. Jenna was quieter, more observant. She watched Zuri with something resembling curiosity, maybe even guilt, but she said nothing. Silence, after all, was part of the uniform. Each morning, students gathered in the school's central courtyard before the bell, an open arena ringed by limestone and glass. It wasn't just a gathering place, it was a stage where eyes judged, whispers traveled faster than sound, and social cues held more weight than grades. Here, Zuri walked every day, not out of place, but not yet placed, and in a setting built. On assumptions, it was only a matter of time before someone mistook her silence for weakness. One overcast morning, as the courtyard buzzed with its usual mix of polished shoes and curated laughter, Zuri rolled up on her bike, her movement quiet against the noise. She dismounted with practiced ease and leaned it against the gate, reaching for the lock with the same calm rhythm she brought every day. That's when Chloe stepped forward, her tone already dressed in performance, her voice laced with mock amusement. "You lost," she called out, her smirk spreading as students turned to look. Or, is this some kind of social experiment? The laughter that followed wasn't spontaneous. It was eager, a cue others were waiting for. But Zuri didn't blink. She clicked the lock shut, adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder, and walked past Chloe as if the words had never touched her. That silence, that composure, it landed harder than any insult could have. And Chloe, sensing her performance hadn't hit its mark, watched her walk away with a flare of something sharper than annoyance. Insecurity. Inside the school, the quiet war escalated. Rumors bloomed like weeds. A photoshopped screenshot floated around by lunch showing a fake Venmo request from Zuri asking for lunch money. In the locker room, Chloe whispered loud enough to be overheard. You'd think someone with that much confidence would at least own real shoes. Her clique laughed, and for a moment even those who knew better didn't intervene. In chemistry, Jenna watched Zuri from across the room. The usually steady hand that held Zuri's pen now trembled slightly as she wrote, though her face remained unreadable. The tremble disappeared as quickly as it appeared, but Jenna saw it, and something inside her shifted. That night, the silence followed Zuri home. Naomi Bennett found her daughter sitting cross-legged on the floor of her room, a photo of her late father resting between her fingers. The lights were low, the house silent except for the soft hum of wind through the smart glass windows. Naomi didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. When she finally did, it was a whisper. "You don't owe anyone your voice." Zuri closed her journal, her fingers curling around its spine like it was a handle. "But maybe," she said quietly, her eyes not leaving the photo, "maybe I owe myself my presence." The next day, the school sent out digital invitations to an upcoming charity gala, an elegant affair meant to raise funds for a scholarship initiative supporting students from underserved communities. The announcement buzzed through the student body. What they didn't know, what no one yet suspected, was that the entire event had been funded by an anonymous donor. A donor whose name didn't need to be printed, because soon the truth would echo louder than the laughter. The night of the gala unfolded with silver lights, smooth jazz, and polished expectations. The students of Northridge Academy arrived in black cars and branded dresses, their names printed on place cards and their futures stitched into the fabric of the elite. Laughter sparkled like champagne flutes, and the hall buzzed with self-importance, until the doors parted quietly for Zuri Bennett. She walked in alone, wrapped in a charcoal gray gown that moved like liquid elegance. Her hair was pulled high, her posture upright, and yet she wore the same quiet composure she carried in her hoodie and jeans. She didn't search for attention. She never had. But that didn't stop the room from shifting. Conversations dulled into murmurs as heads turned. Chloe, already surrounded by classmates near the punch table, saw her and stiffened. Her voice, sharp as ever, cut across the hush. "Did you sneak in?" she scoffed, her tone playful but edged with something brittle. A few of her followers chuckled, but the sound felt misplaced, forced. Zuri didn't flinch. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a smirk, just a signal of awareness. Before she could answer, the microphone at the center of the stage crackled, commanding the room's attention. The principal, standing tall behind the podium, cleared his throat. "Tonight, we are honored to welcome the Bennett family," he announced, "whose generous foundation made this evening possible." A pause. Then a murmur swept through the audience like a tide pulling back. Eyes darted toward Zuri. Confusion turned to realization. Chloe's smirk faltered. From the wings, Naomi Bennett stepped forward, dressed in a simple, floor-length gown that whispered elegance. Her walk was deliberate, graceful. She paused beneath the event's banner, the Bennett Scholarship Fund, and looked out into the room. "This," she said softly, her voice carrying without effort, "is my daughter's vision." Zuri stepped forward then, climbing the stage with the same unbothered rhythm she had always carried through the courtyard. She took the mic without hesitation. Her gaze swept over the crowd, calm and unshaken. "For those who never get invited to the table," she said, voice firm but warm, "this fund is your chair." Chloe's mouth parted slightly, but nothing came out. Her arms folded, more out of confusion than confidence now. Jenna stood beside her, eyes lowered, hands clasped. For a moment the whole room sat in stillness, not because of shock, but because the weight of their assumptions had just collapsed into quiet. Zuri didn't gloat. She didn't raise an eyebrow or wait for applause. She simply nodded once, stepped off the stage, and walked down the center of the ballroom like it was just another hallway. And this time, the silence that followed her didn't mock or challenge. It watched. It listened. It remembered. The lights dimmed just slightly after Zuri stepped down from the stage, but the weight of her presence lingered in the room like an echo. Somewhere between the clinking of glasses and the clearing of throats, a memory unfurled quietly in her mind. A flashback she hadn't summoned in years. She was 10 again, standing on a small school stage in her old public elementary, clutching a crumpled paper with trembling hands. Her voice shook as she read the opening lines of her poem, her words tripping over themselves, the stutter cutting into her confidence like broken rhythm. Laughter erupted from the front row, sharp, childish, cruel. She had frozen mid-sentence, her throat locked, her palms damp, and she never stepped on that stage again. Later that night, her father had found her curled in a corner of their library, the poem still in her fist. He knelt down beside her, didn't ask what happened. He simply said, "Your value doesn't need validation, Zuri. It needs roots. Let others shout for attention. You grow." And she did, quietly, patiently, beneath the surface, like a tree growing beneath the noise of the world. Now, here she stood in silk and silence, in a room full of people who had mistaken her quiet for absence, her simplicity for lack. She glanced at Chloe. Shoulders tight, smile gone, shrinking behind a pride that no longer knew where to rest. And beside her, Jenna shifted uneasily, her gaze darting between Zuri and the polished marble beneath her feet, as if searching for a script that no longer existed. Zuri felt something surprising rise within her. Not anger, not triumph, just clarity. The twist wasn't that she was wealthy. That was the distraction, the noise. The twist was that she had never needed them to know who she was in order to be complete. Their shock was never about her identity. It was about their own blindness. They had frozen at the sight of her name, her status, the banner bearing her legacy. But the real wealth wasn't in the dollars behind her. It was in the peace within her. Peace they couldn't touch, peace they couldn't understand. As the room moved on, speeches, claps, more champagne, Zuri remained still for a breath longer, holding on to that memory of a stuttering girl who once believed she had to speak perfectly to be seen. She didn't need the microphone anymore. She didn't need the spotlight. All she needed was this, her own quiet knowing, that she had never been less, and now, more than ever, she knew she didn't need them to become whole, because she already was. The week that followed the gala was quieter at Northridge Academy. Not the kind of quiet that came from absence, but the kind that lingered when something unspoken had finally been seen. Chloe Whitmore, once the loudest voice in every room, had softened. She no longer laughed so sharply in the courtyard. No longer tossed careless comments over her shoulder as she passed Zuri's locker. In fact, she no longer looked at Zuri at all. And when she did, by accident, in passing, it was brief, her eyes flicking away with the uneasy weight of unspoken guilt. She hadn't found the words to respond to her own behavior, not because they didn't exist, but because she didn't trust herself to speak them honestly. Jenna, on the other hand, found a way. A small envelope was tucked into the front of Zuri's locker one morning, folded carefully and unsigned, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was a single sentence written in blue ink. "I'm sorry for laughing. I knew better." Zuri read it in silence. She didn't smile. She didn't. Right back. But the next morning, as Jenna passed her in the hall, their eyes met for a second longer than usual, and Zuri nodded. Just once. Just enough. By the end of the week, a new bronze plaque had been installed on the back wall of the school library. Students passed it without knowing who had arranged it, but they read the words all the same. The Zuri Bennett Fellowship, for those building futures from overlooked beginnings. Underneath it, a few small framed photos had been mounted. Students, receiving awards, community outreach programs, workshops in tech and art. None of them featured Zuri herself. That was never the point. She still rode her bike to school every morning, tires whispering across the pavement while luxury cars lined the drop-off lane. She still wore her hoodies layered over t-shirts, her earbuds in, but the music low. But something had changed. Not in her, but around her. Teachers paused longer when speaking to her. Students stepped aside, not out of fear, but respect. She no longer felt like a shadow moving through glass halls. Her presence stretched now. Unspoken. Confident, unshakable. Naomi Bennett watched from a distance, as always. She never came to the school uninvited. She didn't hover or correct or impose. But she paid attention. She saw the subtle shifts in her daughter's gait, the new way she held her shoulders, the gentler set of her jaw. It wasn't pride that filled Naomi. It was recognition. Her daughter had not just endured the cruelty of perception. She had quietly, firmly reshaped it. That night, Zuri sat cross-legged in bed, journal open on her lap. She didn't write about the gala. She didn't write about Chloe or Jenna or even the plaque. She simply wrote what had settled in her bones long before they knew her name. Power isn't the gasp when they find out your name. It's the peace of never needing them to. She closed the journal, turned off the light, and let the quiet settle in again. Not as isolation, but as home. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with presence, the kind that lingers long after the room has gone quiet. Zuri Bennett never raised her voice. She didn't meet cruelty with cruelty or fire with flame. Instead, she stood steady while the truth caught up, letting it arrive dressed in grace, quiet and undeniable. And when it did, it spoke louder than anything they could have imagined. If you've ever been whispered about behind your back, laughed at for what you wore, or reduced to someone else's assumption of your worth, then Zuri's silence belongs to you, too. Have you ever walked into a room and felt smaller than your dreams, like you had to earn the right to be seen? Then you already know what she carried. Share your story below, and if Zuri's quiet strength reminded you of your own, pass this story along. Because dignity doesn't shout. It simply walks forward until everyone else has no choice but to stop and listen. And we'll see you in the next story, where the ones they overlook become the ones they can't forget.